Hello and welcome to the second video of this series of the DFVP 111 video series of lectures. I'm your host, Chris Maxwell, and I'm your professor too, so hey, check that out. Synchronicity or something. Today we're talking about elements of composition, so we're going to talk about shot sizes and the basic elements of composition, as I just said. Okay, so shot size is one of those things that you're going to encounter when you're talking about photography and videography a lot. This is what gets bandied about a lot and is the basic vocabulary that you use to determine what kind of shot you're getting. And this all has to do with the relationship to the human body. So I'm going to draw a very detailed sketch of a human being here. Big long torso and legs that are long and arms. Look at this awesome dude. I'm going to give him some hair and some eyes. And he's a happy dude. He's smiling. Okay. Your biggest shot that you've got is your wide shot. And a wide shot means that you see the whole subject. So if we were to frame this up, it would look something like this. So that's our frame. And we can see the whole person in it. That's our subject right there in the middle, and we have plenty of frame to frame them up. Now, what's kind of weird about this is that the human body subject is not the same shape as our frame is, so this creates a lot of interesting ideas of what to do with this sort of negative space over here. So the next kind of shot, if you will, is what we call a medium shot. Now, a medium shot is going to encompass most of the person, but probably cut off their legs. This is usually what we call sort of a waist-up shot, is a medium shot. So again, you accomplish this by moving the camera either closer into the subject or by zooming in with a zoom lens. But the basic idea of a medium shot is that you're getting about half of the person, and typically the part that you're interested in is going to be the top half. But there are exceptions. Then we get into the idea of a close-up. Now, a close-up is going to start pretty much head and shoulders and focus primarily on the face, and it could be that wide, or it could be a close-up could be a little bit more intimate. It could be about this big. Whether or not it has the head and shoulders. Now, obviously, this person has a freakishly long neck, so this is not intended to be exactly to scale. But a close-up is pretty much going to get the whole face, and you can start, getting tighter close-ups, and sometimes get in here to be a really tight frame, or maybe even the haircut, something like that. Now, there's another level, another layer, and this is what we call an extreme close-up. So an extreme close-up is going to go in and give us less than the entire picture of a face. So if we just want to see the person's eyes, we're going to make a frame around their eyes like that. So what we'll end up with is our big cinematic frame over here, and we're going to see eyes. And this is something that you see from like a spaghetti western. It's like, ah, and it's really intense. So that's an extreme close-up because it's cutting off, he's got his head up here and he's got his, mouth down here. And so it's extreme because it's super, super close and we're isolating parts of the body. Or, if it's a subject, if you're shooting a car or a spaceship or something like that. This is meant to show like a super specific detail, and it gets into the idea of what we call hyper-realism, where, realism in cinema, basically means that you see the same stuff that your eye would, but if you go in and start getting super close up on things, super macro shots and all that kind of stuff, then that's more real than real. You wouldn't normally be able to see that unless you put your eyeball like right up into the thing, which, as demonstrated there, is kind of creepy and not fun. So that's hyper-realism, is accomplished through things like extreme close-ups. So, all right, so we've got this dude, and he is we're gonna take a hike with him for a second. So let's get rid of that guy and think about the idea of aspect ratio. We're getting into more specifics of compositional theory, and probably the building block of that is your aspect ratio. Now that's a very obtuse sounding word. Aspect ratio is like 4:3 or 16:9, and you're like, hey, welcome to math class, right? I didn't sign up for this, but there's a reason that you need this, and I'll be showing you this presently. So here's the idea with aspect ratio is it determines the shape of your canvas. Now you could have a canvas in all kinds of different shapes. So here's some common ones. This is not square. We're going to say that this is 4 units wide by 3 units tall. And that's what an aspect ratio means. It's how wide is it versus how tall is it. So we call this 4:3. And this is what television used to be. And this is actually what movies were for a long time. And when television came out, the motion picture industry got all worried about what was going to happen when they had to compete with television. So televisions were 4:3 because that's what movies were, and everybody used the same, what they call square format. Obviously, 4:3 is not actually square. 4:4 would be square. But in the video and film world, we just kind of like to approximate. It's easier to say square than whatever. So the cinema came out with widescreen, and this is back in the 40s, 50s, where they were going to do something special to entice people to come out to the theater instead of watching stuff on their televisions, and it was going to be super wide, and that was better because you had all this canvas, and it was very big, and it was a panoramic vista, and very cool and everything. So they ended up with some different formats that were super wide, like 185:1 and 235:1, and getting very close to something like 3:1 aspect ratio. And it took a long time for television to catch up. But television did catch up in the form of high definition video and widescreen presentation. And so we ended up with a frame that looks something like this. And it's close to 2:1, but it's not exactly 2:1. So actually what it is this is a terrible fraction, but it's 16:9. If that were, if this were an 8, that would be 2:1. Or if this was 18, it would be 2:1. So it's really easy to remember this as being basically twice as wide as it is tall, but not quite. So this is 16:9, and this is the aspect ratio that high definition television and high definition video are shot in and presented. And that's had a bleed over effect back into cinema. A lot of cinema films that are released into the movie theaters are, they know that it's going to come out on DVD and Blu-ray and all these things. So a lot of times they'll just shoot it at 16:9 and call that good enough. Although people who are very specific, people who are very cinephile, they like to stick to their very wide 2.35:1 aspect ratios, and this is why even on a 16:9 monitor sometimes you'll still see a movie that's still going to have black bars in order to get it to the right thing. I don't know about that. It's fun. But the other thing that you run into today, which is really weird, is cell phone video. And cell phone videos tend to have this problem of people shooting them vertically, so it's like 1:2, so it's 1 unit wide by 2 units tall, and this is not a standard. This is just something that you see a lot now. And so when you see something like this that's put out onto something like YouTube, which has a standard 16:9 aspect ratio, you end up getting, in order to transfer that over, you get black bars on the left and right of it. And it's just basically a terrible aspect ratio because it's not very visually interesting. You can basically fit a person inside of it, but there's not anything else to see in the frame other than about a person. And so this is not a professional format. This isn't something that we do in class or anything. I just wanted to kind of poke fun at cell phone video. So 16:9, 4:3, why does this stuff matter? Well, let's take a look. So all of this talk about aspect ratio is important because it feeds into one of the primary features of good composition. Composition is defined by 3 basic concepts, and that is Oh, crazy, crazy drawing pad. No, that's not one of them. By balance. Yay, balance. Also, flow. And finally, the third big one is depth. They hired me because I have such excellent handwriting. This is why I get to do this. Yeah, so your aspect ratio figures prominently into this first idea of balance. And there it is, a little fulcrum with a thing over here and a thing over here. And this one's heavier, right? Okay, balance. Okay, so what is balance? Balance is the idea that when you have a frame, there's the psychological concept that means that we look at it and think of it kind of like a physical object. And in that sense, we can have a frame that is either unbalanced or balanced. So there's a couple of ways to achieve this. And the primary one is the position of objects in your frame. If you put a big red circle in the middle of a white frame, that's going to be pretty balanced. You know, you see the difference between the distance between the edges is uniform on both sides. It's right there in the middle. So it doesn't look like if you put a little fulcrum underneath this, it doesn't look like that picture is going to go swaying one way or another, or any other Blondie songs. However, if I put that same big red ball way over here on the side, suddenly if I put my fulcrum down here again, if I look at this, it looks like it's going to be like, whoa, way off to this side. It's look like it's unbalanced in this direction, right? Because that side is way heavier. Now, of course, there's no real mass here. There's no real, weight to either side of this. But psychologically speaking, we expect that it will behave sort of like this, which is a kind of a weird thing about the human brain. So there's different ways that you can balance out the frame. Now, remember with this that there's no right answer. You don't necessarily want a frame to be balanced or unbalanced. But why would you make the distinction to do one or the other? Well, let's talk about that. If you have a frame, and I'll try my best to draw a decent frame now, and you want the object inside of it to feel like it's completely sort of peaceful and serene and neutral, you could put it right in the middle. Let's say we're just going to put this person right in the middle of the frame. And he's going to be all neutral. And there's nothing inherently going on there when you look at that. You don't think, oh, well, this person's going to do something, or you don't particularly feel any particular way about it. It's straight on and it's right in the middle, and there's the same amount of sort of visual potential on both sides of him in the frame, and so it's a sort of calming and sort of relaxing kind of a composition. And that's pretty good when you want to do things that are, not charged at all, not having any kind of emotional impact or wanting to make the audience sort of feel anything. So this is sort of the mindless zombie frame of meh, of okay, there's a dude in the middle, and that's where he is. Now, on the other hand, there's a lot of interesting sort of psychological prospects to putting somebody off-center. Give him the same hair here. But now, suddenly, not only do we have him here, but whoa, what's all this white space over here for, right? That's what's called like potential. It's negative space. It gives the frame some sort of potential. Now, of course, if we put our fulcrum underneath the middle of it, we're going to be like, whoa, that's way heavy, just like our little red circle was earlier. But what it does is it gives us the capability to create what's called a dynamic, some sort of dynamism, sort of potential action. This is a really good way to frame something if we think the person's going to walk in this direction, or even if he's going to look over here and see something. There's plenty of potential in that frame. And this is what gets back to aspect ratio, is that with a wide aspect ratio like this, you can easily unbalance the frame. Whereas if you have more of a 4x3 frame and you put your guy over to the side, there's not that much potential space over here to work with. It doesn't feel the same. You know, if you look at these, and again, if we do our fulcrum test, put that in the middle, this one seems like way more unbalanced than this one does. It's just sort of like, oh, it's kind of unbalanced. So this gives you the capability to, you know, juxtapose images, you know, put images next to each other, put things in your frame that on a wider screen, you have a more of that space to work with in order to create, again, what we call a dynamic frame, something that looks like it's going to give some sort of motion. Okay, so if you want to, by default, you want to kind of start out with a balanced frame. So there's a couple of things you can do. We showed you how you can put it right in the middle, and that's pretty simple and straightforward. But what if you want to have something over here where there's a person, and maybe there's a house in the background? Well, there's a couple of different things that affect how an image is balanced. So we could put a little house back in the distance, and that would get it fairly well balanced. If you look at that and think about it pivoting on the middle of itself, you're like, okay, those things are roughly similar. But the size of the object matters. If we put, if we put the house way in the background, suddenly the size of that is not as impressive, and we still end up with our composition wanting to kind of slide to the left there. So size matters, which I don't have any comment on. Another thing that matters is how bright something is. So we've got this guy here, and this is not a very good explanation, but I can choose a equivalent little gray box over here, and that would be fairly equal. And like I said, since size matters, I can make the box smaller, and it wouldn't really work. This is still unbalanced in that direction. But color comes into this, color and brightness. It's like, if I actually do it right, it would come into play. If I put that same small block over here, but suddenly it's a big bright red block, that has more visual weight to it. The whole idea here is this weird sort of physics metaphor, is the idea of weight. And suddenly this sort of black and white light face is about balanced with this super bright red box. And you notice that, you know, if you think about this composition, suddenly it's like, oh yeah, that does kind of balance out. You know, you might look at it after a while and you'll get over the fact that there's this huge bright thing over here. But even though the sizes aren't the same, the brightness and the color of this little box over here lends it more visual weight. So it balances out the face a little bit better. Now obviously, if we made it about the same size, it would imbalance it in the other direction. Suddenly like, whoa, that giant red bulbous blobulous, what is that? Some sort of a spider web? I don't know. I have no plans when I do this. This is just completely off the cuff. Unbalances it in the other direction. So all things being equal, the brighter thing is going to feel like it has more visual weight to it. And there's some more markers for you. Oh, what are we doing? Okay, so the other thing that this really becomes an issue with is the idea of look space. Again, here's our frame. And we have our imaginary person in the middle of it. Now, we're going to say that they're looking straight ahead. And that works. If they're looking straight into the camera and they're right in the middle, then that feels balanced. Backing up, if we have them more of a profile here and they're looking in this direction, suddenly that doesn't quite feel as balanced. And there's a reason for this. Other than just sort of the hideous drawing, is that now that he's in the center and looking over to the right, there's more visual weight here. And even though there's not an actual arrow there, that's a completely imaginary look space, sight line over there, we've evolved over millions of years to understand that when we look at a face, we know kind of what's going on with it, and we look at the direction that the eyes are looking in, and we expect that they are looking at something. So visually speaking, that translates into a desire to have some space for that look. You know, the actual act of looking has a volume to it, and it should have some screen space. So we've got this phantom space over here, but then we've got all of this negative space on the other side, and it feels unweighted. This feels like if you put your fulcrum down here, you're like, oh wow, this is super heavy in this direction because there's nothing holding it back here, but there's a big heavy face in the middle, and then there's all this look space in here that has a psychological weight to it, and it pulls it off balance. So what you can do, if I can undo far enough, is you would reframe this. So we don't use that part. We're going to draw our frame now. Not in that color. What we want to do is we want to put him over to the side so that there's more space for that imaginary look, and therefore we sort of restore balance. So once again, going back to our trusty little fulcrum, we've got weight over here with our dude, and we've got weight over here with our imaginary look space, and voila, we are balanced again. So we have our balance going on, and that's affected by the size of our objects and the brightness of them in color and that look space that we just looked at. The look space applies for other things besides people as well. You can have look space for a car. It's also, it's basically the potential for any directional activity. So, you know, if you have a, you know, some sort of a spaceship here, I'm going to draw the world's worst spaceship. Which is there. It's got little rockets on the back. That doesn't look anything like a spaceship. So thanks for bearing with me here. But that's a little cockpit there, right? And it's got little guns coming out the front. Okay, so this is our spaceship, and it's traveling in this direction. So we give it some space in front of it, and that keeps it nice and balanced. Again, if you look at that, you're like, oh, okay, even though the spaceship is over here, the fact that it's moving in this direction means that the space in front of it has a purpose, has the potential for there to be movement and action in it, and there's information that's coming in here that's equal weight to what's coming over here, so it doesn't feel unbalanced. I'm going to undo all the way back to the beginning of my crappy starship. Even further, apparently. One of these days I'm going to learn how to use a computer, and then I'll be a film professor. So, yeah, that look space is not just for people. It applies for objects and anything that has the potential for motion and sort of a directionality to it. So you want to take that into account. And here we get into the next most interesting thing, probably the most practical thing for you to walk away from this composition lesson from, which is a rule. And everybody loves rules, right? Because they help us to do things the right way. And of course, there is no one right way to do things, but when you're just starting out, it really helps to have some foundations. So in the next video, we're going to go over the very important concept of the rule of thirds.